Hospitals are theaters. Under the cold, white lights, dramas of every genre unfold every second. As the head of neurology at the Bridgewater Institute, I was a privileged spectator, and often a director. My stage was the human nervous system, an infinitely complex network where I mapped pain, deciphered paralysis, and hunted for the source of the afflictions that torment the mind. I believed, with an almost religious conviction, that everything could be explained. Every phantom limb, every migraine, every tremor, it was all just a biochemical puzzle waiting to be solved. I was a man of science, an architect of reason in a world of biological chaos. That was my faith. And every faith, sooner or later, is tested. My test arrived on a Tuesday night, in the form of a man named Mr. Alistar. He didn't walk in. He arrived as a heap of human wreckage, pulled from a car crash so violent the paramedics had used the phrase "incompatible with life" in their initial report. Multiple compound fractures in his left leg, third-degree burns covering his right arm where the car's molten metal had fused to his skin. A severe concussion and 3 ribs that had punctured a lung. By every law of medicine I had studied for 20 years, he should have been screaming, or in anaphylactic shock, or dead. But Mr. Alistar was doing none of those things. When I was paged for an emergency consult, I found him lying on an ER gurney, surrounded by a team of stunned doctors and nurses. There was a disturbing serenity about him. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, were open and placid. He was staring at the ceiling tiles with an air of mild curiosity, as if he were watching passing clouds, not lying with his leg bent at an unnatural angle and the skin of his arm charred down to the muscle. "Is he responsive?" I asked the ER physician, a young resident whose face was as white as the sheets. "Yes, doctor," he said, his voice trembling. "He's perfectly lucid, knows his name, where he was, but he doesn't..." The resident hesitated. "He says it doesn't hurt." I moved closer. "Mr. Alistar, my name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I'm a neurologist. Can you tell me what you're feeling right now?" His head turned slowly toward me. A faint, polite smile touched his lips. "A bit compressed," he said, his voice surprisingly clear. "There's a pressure in my chest, and my leg feels stuck. It's an inconvenience." An inconvenience. He used the word inconvenience to describe injuries that should have been sending a cascade of pain signals so overwhelming his brain would have simply shut down. We ran the first battery of tests. His vitals were stable, almost relaxed. The adrenaline in his system was minimal. It was as if his body hadn't registered the trauma it had suffered. My scientific mind kicked into high gear, running through the possibilities. A rare spinal cord lesion that selectively blocked nociceptive pathways? A previously unknown congenital analgesia? Or perhaps a dissociative state so profound that his mind had completely divorced itself from his body? In the days that followed, Mr. Alistar became my personal puzzle. I had him moved to an isolated room on my floor under the pretext of intensive neurological observation. The truth was, I wanted him for myself. He was a medical impossibility, an affront to every known law of human physiology. I ran every test. Nerve conduction studies, his nerves transmitted electrical signals perfectly. Functional MRIs while we applied stimuli, his brain registered touch, pressure, heat, cold. But the somatosensory cortex, the brain's pain center, remained dormant, silent. The strangest part was his demeanor. He was endlessly patient. He endured the agonizing procedures, the debriding of his burns, the setting of his broken bones, with the same passive calm as someone watching a gardener water plants. He thanked the nurses. He asked about my day. And while I was in his room,
I began to feel things. A sharp, phantom ache in my own left leg, right where his fracture was. A searing heat in my right hand as a nurse changed the dressings on his arm. I dismissed it as heightened empathy, a byproduct of stress and my growing obsession with the case. My brain was playing tricks on me. It had to be. The proof that something was terribly wrong came on the 5th day. I decided on one last test, a more invasive procedure, a nerve biopsy directly from the injured area of his leg to search for molecular anomalies. The procedure involved inserting a long, thick needle deep into the tissue to extract a sample. It was a procedure that, even with a local anesthetic, caused considerable discomfort. For someone without anesthetic and with his injuries, it should have been indescribable torture. We used no anesthetic. He insisted it wasn't necessary. I prepped the needle. The nurses in the room were visibly tense. Mr. Alistar simply watched me with his calm blue eyes. "Whenever you're ready, doctor," he said softly. I positioned the needle over the swollen, purpled tissue of his calf. I took a breath, and with a firm, practiced motion, I drove the needle into his flesh. Mr. Alistar didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even take a sharp breath. But I did. The instant the metal pierced his skin, a blinding, white-hot pain exploded in my own left leg. It wasn't an ache. It was a lightning strike. A guttural sound ripped from my throat, a scream I didn't recognize as my own. My vision tunneled to black, and my legs gave out from under me. I collapsed onto the hospital floor, clutching my own leg, which felt as if it were being crushed in a hydraulic press, the bone shattering into 1,000 pieces. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was Mr. Alistar's face, looking down at me from his gurney. And for the first time, the expression in his eyes wasn't serenity, it was pity. I awoke to the familiar smell of antiseptic and the gentle beeping of a heart monitor. For a confused moment, I thought I was still in Mr. Alistar's room, trapped in a fever dream. But the mattress was different, firmer, and the pain in my leg, it was gone. It was so completely gone that its absence was, in itself, a phantom sensation. I sat up abruptly. I wasn't in room 502. I was in a private room, 3 floors up, with an IV in my arm and the worried gaze of Dr. Lena Hansen fixed on me. Lena was my colleague, and probably my only friend at the Institute. A brilliant psychiatrist with a mind as sharp as my own, but with a dose of humanity that I often sacrificed at the altar of logic. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Eris," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You gave us quite a scare." "My leg," I muttered, feeling it through the thin hospital blanket. There was nothing. No pain, no swelling, no muscular memory of the agony. What happened? "You collapsed," Lena explained, her clinical tone carefully neutral. "A vasovagal syncope episode, likely brought on by extreme stress. Your workup was clean. EKG is normal, the MRI on your leg is clear. Eris, have you been sleeping? Eating? You dove into this Alistar case like a drowning man." I stared at her, desperation starting to bubble in my chest. "It wasn't stress, Lena. I felt it. The biopsy, the moment the needle touched him, I felt his pain. It was like his nerve was wired to mine." Lena sighed, a sound heavy with a compassion that enraged me. It was the sound she used on delusional patients. "It's called a mirrored sympathetic response. It's an extreme form of empathy, exacerbated by exhaustion and your fixation on the case. Your brain, so focused on the pain he should have been feeling, created a perfect simulation of it. It's a rare but documented phenomenon, A trick of the mind. A trick of the mind. They had found a neat scientific box to put my horror in. They diagnosed me, explained me, and in doing so, they invalidated me completely. I knew what I had felt. It was not a simulation, it was a transmission. My discharge was swift, but it came with a condition. I was officially removed from Mr. Alistar's case. Director Evans, a man whose primary concerns were shareholders and the Institute's flawless reputation, was adamant. "For your own good, Aris," he'd said with a false paternalism that turned my stomach. "Take a week off, rest. When you come back, I want you focused on other cases. Mr. Alistar will be transferred to Dr. Ramirez's team." I was exiled, forbidden from seeing the patient who had somehow hacked into my nervous system. But what Evans didn't understand was that he wasn't protecting me, he was caging me with the mystery. The question was no longer, what is wrong with Mr. Alistar? The question had become terrifyingly personal. What is Mr. Alistar doing to me? I spent the next 2 days at home, feigning rest, but my mind was working feverishly. I hacked into the hospital's record system remotely, using my department head privileges before Evans had a chance to revoke them. I dug into Mr. Alistar's life, or the lack thereof. The name was common, any institution in the country. He was a ghost who had materialized on a gurney, a man who didn't exist until the moment he should have died. I returned to the Institute not as a doctor, but as a phantom. I moved through the halls, observing from a distance. I made small talk with the nurses assigned to room 502, extracting information under the guise of professional concern. And that's how I began to notice a pattern, a terrifying, impossible correlation. On Wednesday, a patient in room 504, next door to Alistar, underwent a painful skin graft surgery. Her first 24 hours were a hell of breakthrough pain, despite the morphine. On Thursday morning, Alistar's chart, which I obsessively accessed every hour, showed a remarkable improvement in his own burns. The inflammation had subsided at a rate that Dr. Ramirez's team described as miraculous. On Friday, a young athlete in room 501 had the pins in a complex fracture adjusted, a procedure that left him in agony for hours. On Saturday morning, Alistar's scans showed bone calcification in his own leg that was weeks ahead of schedule. He was healing. He was healing at a rate that defied biology. And his recovery, it seemed, was fueled by the pain of others. A monstrous hypothesis began to form in my mind, a theory that belonged more to a gothic horror novel than a neurological journal. Alistar wasn't just immune to his own pain, he was a vacuum, a biological vortex that, unconsciously, absorbed the pain around him to fuel his own regeneration. The initial trauma from his accident was so cataclysmic that he couldn't contain the energy. He had broadcast it, and I, through my proximity and intense focus, had been the antenna that picked up the signal at the moment of the biopsy. I felt like a man on the verge of madness, but the correlation in the data was undeniable. I needed proof. I needed a controlled test. The opportunity came on Monday. A patient at the end of the hall, in room 512, needed a dislocated shoulder reset. It was a quick but brutally painful procedure, and due to a heart condition, the patient couldn't be heavily sedated. He would be fully conscious. I couldn't be there, but Lena, despite her skepticism, owed me a favor. I asked her to do something simple, to observe Mr. Alistar at precisely 3 p.m., the scheduled time for the procedure. I asked her to be in the room with him under the pretext of a routine psychiatric evaluation and to simply watch his behavior. At 2:59 p.m.,
I was in an empty observation lounge, staring at the security camera feed for the fifth-floor corridor. I couldn't see inside the rooms, but I could feel the tension in the air. At 3:02 p.m., a sharp, muffled scream echoed down the hall from the direction of room 512. The scream of a man in pure, unendurable pain. My heart hammered. My phone vibrated a minute later. It was a text from Lena. A single sentence. He was asleep. At the moment of the scream, he didn't wake up. He just sighed, like a man reaching the deepest, most peaceful stage of sleep. And Aris, I swear to God, he smiled. A cold descended my spine. A cold that was not of this world. The hypothesis was confirmed. My monster was real. He didn't feel pain. He fed on it. And the banquet all around him, in this theater of suffering, was endless.
The smile, that single word in Lena's text, smiled, demolished the last foundations of my rational world. For the next 2 days, I moved through the hospital like a sleepwalker, performing my duties with an automated part of my brain while my soul thrashed in a sea of horror. Every groan from a patient in recovery, every pain-contorted face, every accelerated beep of a heart monitor was no longer just part of the job. It was the sound of Alistar feeding. The hospital wasn't a place of healing, it was his pantry. I was trapped by an impossible moral dilemma. If I revealed my suspicions, I would be admitted to Lena's psychiatric wing faster than I could say psychic vampirism. My career, my reputation, my life as I knew it would be over. They would turn me into another case study, the brilliant doctor who broke under pressure. And Alistar, he would simply be transferred, a fascinating medical enigma, to another hospital, where he would find a new feast.
But silence. Silence was complicity. It was sitting down to dinner with the monster. Every day I allowed this to continue, I was violating my oath, the very oath that had led me to the edge of this abyss. I could no longer be a doctor, not here. But I couldn't leave either. I was the only one who knew the truth. I was the unwilling guardian of this profane secret. There was only one path forward. I had to confront him, not as a doctor, for medicine had proven useless, but as a man. I had to look into the abyss and see what was looking back. That night, I waited until the halls were quiet and the night staff was a skeleton crew. I used my old key card, not yet deactivated, to enter the fifth-floor wing. The corridor felt different. Every closed door seemed to hide a tributary of pain flowing toward room 502. The air felt thicker, heavier, charged with an unseen electricity. The door to Alistar's room was unlocked. I slipped inside silently. He wasn't asleep. He was sitting up in bed, his body almost completely healed, the scars from his burns looking months old instead of days. He was looking out the window at the sleeping city, the glow of distant lights reflecting in his pale eyes. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He turned his head slowly, and the same faint, polite smile from before touched his lips.
"Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice calm, "I had a feeling you'd be back." "You know why I'm here," I said, my own voice sounding strained and foreign to my ears. "I have an idea," he replied, and gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Please, you look tired." His calm was the most monstrous thing of all. I ignored the chair. "The patient in 512, the dislocated shoulder. The patient in 504, the skin graft, my leg. You feel it, don't you? Or rather, you don't feel it. You absorb it. You feed on it." I expected denial, anger, confusion, anything. But Alistar just watched me with a deep and ancient sadness. The serenity on his face wasn't peace, it was resignation.
Feed is such a predatory word, doctor, he said, his voice as smooth as silk. It implies intent, choice. I do not choose. I am. I always have been. He looked down at his own nearly healed hands. Do you think this is a gift, to not feel the knife, the broken bone, the burning skin? For you, pain is a signal, an alarm your body sends. For me, the silence in my own body is the alarm. The silence means I am listening to the symphony of the world's agony. I am a conduit, an anomaly, a mistake in the universe's wiring. Pain flows to me like water to a drain. I do not call it. It simply comes.
His confession brought no relief, only a deeper layer of existential horror. He wasn't a hungry monster. He was a living prison, condemned to a lonely existence, feeling the echoes of all the suffering around him. When I was born, he continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the window, the doctors told my mother I was a miracle, a baby who never cried. They didn't know that I was hearing the cries of every other baby in the nursery. My entire life has been like that, a constant low hum of the world's pain. At times it's overwhelming, and my condition, it only activates to protect itself. The healing, the regeneration, it only works when the influx of pain is great enough to threaten to erase me. He finally looked at me, and his blue eyes held the same expression I had seen as I blacked out. Pity.
Your pain, doctor, he whispered, and the air in the room seemed to turn to ice. The pain you felt that day, it was the purest I have ever encountered. It wasn't just the physical trauma of the needle, it was everything. It was the pain of your exhaustion, your frustration, your faith in science shattering in real time. It was the pain of your mind turning against itself. It was exquisite. I took a step back, a shudder running down my spine. The common pains of the hospital, he continued, his voice now almost hypnotic. The broken bones, the post-operative wounds, they are like crumbs. They sustain me, but they don't truly heal me. They just keep the humming at bay. But your pain, the pain of your obsession, your growing fear with each day you investigated me, that is different. That is a feast. It is an energy that rebuilds my cells in a way I haven't felt in decades. He leaned forward, and for the first time I saw a glimmer in his eyes that was neither serenity nor pity. It was hunger. So please, Dr. Thorne, he said with his terrible, polite smile, don't stop. Don't leave. Keep hunting me. Keep being afraid of me. Because your fear is what heals me best.
His confession didn't free me, it shackled me. I left room 502 that night not with answers, but with the keys to my own cell. A prison with no bars, whose walls were made of my own fear. Every moment of anxiety, every sleepless night, every accelerated beat of my heart when I thought of him was no longer just a symptom of my stress. It was nourishment. I was feeding him with my own mental agony. My life unraveled with terrifying speed. My work, once my sanctuary of logic and order, became a minefield. I found myself avoiding the 5th floor, taking absurd detours through the hospital's labyrinthine corridors to bypass it. The sound of a hospital cart became a herald of doom. The smell of antiseptic made me nauseous. My colleagues began to look at me with a mixture of pity and apprehension. The brilliant Dr. Thorne, the neurology genius, had become a haunted, erratic man who jumped at his own shadow.
But the real torment began when I was alone. The connection Alistar had established with me that first day was not passive. He knew I was a tuned antenna, and he began to use it. I started feeling pains that were not mine, nor were they his. They were samples, little tastes from the hospital's daily banquet. One day in my office, I felt the sharp, stinging pain of a paper cut on my finger, only to see my secretary down the hall shake her hand and run for a bandage a moment later. At home, trying to read, my back seized with a debilitating cramp, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, it was a reflection of old Mr. Henderson in 509, whose herniated disc had flared up. These were not hallucinations. They were reminders, little psychic nudges from Alistar, whispering across my synapses, "I'm here. I'm feeling everything, and I'm thinking of you." He was torturing me with forced empathy, making me a captive audience to the world's symphony of pain. Sleep became my enemy. My nightmares were not of monsters, but of endless white hallways, of Alistar's polite smile, and the sensation of needles piercing skin that wasn't mine.
The breaking point came on a Friday. I made a gross error in a diagnosis, something a first-year intern would have caught. Director Evans summoned me to his office. His false patience had run out. He gave me an ultimatum: a 1-month mandatory medical leave for treatment and reevaluation. I was being cast out of my own kingdom. That night, Lena found me in my empty lab. I was surrounded by MRI scans, nerve conduction charts, and stacks of pain research. I looked like a madman, and I knew it. "Eris, this has to stop," she said, her voice thick with concern. "Look at you. You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. You're destroying yourself. Let me help you, as your friend, as your doctor." I looked at her rational, compassionate face, and the desperation finally broke down all my barriers. I told her everything. About the transferred pain during the biopsy, about Alistar's miraculous recovery, about the phantom pains, about his confession, about how he was feeding on my fear.
I watched her process it all, waiting to see the click in her eyes as professional concern turned into clinical diagnosis. Delusional disorder, stress-induced psychosis. But to my shock, she didn't interrupt. She listened, the skepticism on her face slowly giving way to an expression of thoughtful horror. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy and thick. "The smile," she whispered finally. "I didn't tell anyone, but his smile, it wasn't normal. It wasn't a reflex. It was content. I felt a cold in that room I've never felt before. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone in my madness. And in that moment of connection, a new idea, a final desperate gambit crystallized in my mind. "He told me something," I said to Lena, my voice gaining a new urgency. "He said the silence in his own body is when he hears the world's pain. He said his healing only works when the influx of pain is great enough to threaten to erase him. Lena, he's not a god, he's a system, and every system has a failure point. He's reactive. His ability is a defense." "A defense against what?" she asked. "Against being overwhelmed. But what if we could cut the signal? What if the opposite of pain for him isn't pleasure, but nothingness, absolute silence? If we isolate him from all stimuli, if we deprive him of all the pain around him, what happens?"
My own hypothesis terrified me. His defensive ability would have nothing to react to, and without the influx of external pain to use as fuel, what would happen to his own original pain? The pain from the accident, The pain he's been damming up for weeks. It would come back. All of it. All at once. It was a weapon. A terribly unethical and dangerous weapon. "We have one," I said, the idea now fully formed. "In the old psychiatric research center, in the sub-basement. An anechoic chamber. A sensory deprivation tank. It hasn't been used in years, but the infrastructure is still there. If we can get him in it." Lena stared at me, her face a mask of conflict. "Eris, that's monstrous. If you're wrong, we'd be torturing a vulnerable patient. If you're right, what do you expect to happen? For the pain to kill him?" "I don't know," I admitted, the brutal truth of my ignorance weighing on me. "But it's the only way to fight back. It's the only way to stop the parasite. But I can't do it alone. I need your help, Lena. To move a patient to a decommissioned wing without authorization, I need you." I stared at her, laying bare the last shred of my professional soul and my sanity. I was asking her to risk everything on my insane story. The fate of my world, and perhaps hers, hung on her answer. Her face was pale, her eyes torn between the friend who wanted to save a broken man and the doctor who saw a dangerous, delusional plan. Her decision would be the final verdict. Her face, illuminated by the cold lab lights, was a battlefield of conflicting duties. I saw the doctor in her eyes, analyzing my symptoms, cataloging my probable psychosis. But I also saw the friend who remembered the man I was before the Alistar case and who saw the wreckage I had become. It was the friend who won. "I don't believe in monsters, Eris," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "But I believe in you. I believe that you believe this, and I know that if we don't do something, I'm going to lose you for good." Her decision wasn't based on my evidence, but on my agony. She saw my plan not as a solution to a monster, but as a form of shock therapy for a broken man. It was the only way to pull me back from the brink, and for that, she would risk everything. What followed was a tense, silent ballet in the darkest hours of the hospital. Lena, using her psychiatric authority, forged an emergency transfer for Alistar, citing an acute psychosomatic reaction requiring experimental isolation therapy. It was paperwork so absurd that no one dared question it. The two of us, like shadows in our lab coats, pushed Alistar's gurney through the silent corridors. The hospital at night was a skeleton, and we were grave robbers. Alistar was awake. His pale eyes followed our every move, not with fear, but with a calm that was more unnerving than any resistance. He knew. We reached the decommissioned psychiatric wing. The air here was different, thick with the smell of dust, decaying paper, and forgotten suffering. We found the sensory deprivation chamber. It was a sleek white pod, like a sarcophagus from an abandoned future, a tomb designed to erase the world. As we prepared to move him inside, Alistar turned his head toward me. "Are you sure you want to do this, Doctor?" he whispered, his voice devoid of any threat. The silence is often much louder than the screams." We ignored his warning. With Lena's help, we moved him into the tank, the warm saline water enveloping his healed body. Before we closed the lid, he gave me one last look, the same look of pity. It wasn't for himself, I realized. It was for what was to come. We closed and sealed the chamber. In the adjacent control room, a portable monitor we had brought displayed his vital signs. His heart rate was calm, his breathing steady. The silence was absolute. Minutes dragged on like hours. The monitor remained unchanged. A crushing wave of doubt washed over me. I was wrong. I was just a madman, and I had dragged my only friend into my psychosis. Lena put her hand on my shoulder, a comforting gesture that felt like a sentence. Her look said it all. "It's over, Eris. We'll get you help." And then it began.
A single twitch on the heart monitor, a sharp peak followed by a dip, then another. The rhythm became chaotic, an electrical storm in his chest. We stared at the sealed, soundproof chamber, and from within it we heard a muffled thud, and another. Then a sound that defied the laws of physics and sanity. A moan, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. It grew in volume, in agony, until it became a scream. An inhuman, multifaceted scream, as if 1,000 voices were screaming at once through a single throat. It was the sound of bones breaking, of skin burning, of every disease, every injury, every ounce of pain he had absorbed for weeks, perhaps years, all of it crashing back into his consciousness in one cataclysmic wave. The scream reached a crescendo that vibrated through the observation glass, and then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The heart monitor displayed a single, continuous, flat line. Silence. It was over. I looked at Lena, sweat pouring down my forehead. A grim sense of victory and relief washed through me. It was done. The parasite was dead. But then, I felt it. A familiar, phantom ache in my left leg. Faint, like a distant echo, but undeniably there. I looked at Lena. She was pale, her hand on her own arm. "My shoulder," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "It feels like it's on fire." And in an instant of blinding, terrible clarity, the final truth revealed itself. The truth contained in Alistar's last look of pity. He wasn't the parasite. He wasn't the source. He was the conduit, yes, but he was more than that. He was the dam, a biological anomaly that didn't feed on pain, but contained it. The pain and suffering of that hospital, of every patient within it, was a constant force, a river of agony. Alistar was the only thing keeping it from overflowing. We didn't kill the monster. We broke its cage. Now, the pain was free, untethered. With no vessel to contain it, it was spreading, seeking new hosts. And we, the two beings closest to the epicenter of its release, were the first to feel its touch. We stood in that silent control room, under the cold lights, looking at each other. The horror of our understanding growing with every second. Each of us feeling the initial aches of strangers, the first echoes of a symphony that would now play in our souls forever. I had sought a cure for one man, and in doing so, inherited his disease. I tried to destroy a monster, only to find I had unleashed a plague. Alistar's legacy wasn't the pain he absorbed, it was the silence he left behind. A silence now filled by us. The cycle hadn't ended. It had just found new conductors. And we were only the first. If you enjoyed this creepy story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales every week. Stay spooky!